We are Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the largest, fastest growing, and the most active large-scale Scrum community that has started in New York City many years ago and now has gone viral and global. Today we have our special guest, my old friend and colleague, Amitai Schleier. And I would like to say a few words about Amitai as a part of his introduction. He's the software development coach. He's a legacy code wrestler. And by the way, his self-description is pretty funny. He has a great sense of humor. He's a non-award-winning musician and award-winning bad poet. He publishes fixed-length micro podcasts at Agile in 3 minutes. And by the way, I get those all the time. They're great. Writes variable length articles on his site. It will be shared after this event, and contributes code and direction to notable open source projects. And there's a list of those that I would like to share with you as well. His ideas, prose, music, and puns have manifested mostly at a variety of software-focused venues, conferences, etc., but also at the International Rachmaninoff Conference and at the Alfred Joyce Kilmer Memorial Bad Poetry Contest. So it's just so much irony embedded in his self-description. Amitai, with any further ado, I would like to pass the baton over to you. Please take it away and manage your time. We have a hard stop in the hour. Folks, please be respectful of the time, each other, and the speaker, and hold your questions, and off we go.
Back to you. Thank you, Gene.
Yep.
Thank you. Let me reiterate, if you have a drink or something to eat, please do. I'm also working on a coffee. Just make sure you're muted. If you have questions that you don't want to hold to the end, please type them in the chat, and I'll take a look over there from time to time. And when it seems to fit, I'll pull them in. If you want to tweet or toot about what's going on as you're listening or later, my handles are here. And I think this is the hashtag that I've seen the most, Gene, for these meetups, more or less. And then if you want to get a copy of these slides, we'll have a link afterward. But if it helps you to follow along locally, it's available from this link. Yeah. And I'm going to assume that we have some conversation topics that we'll save some time for. So I'm not going to fill the hour with a talk. I'm just going to set the stage with some thought starters, as is my wont. So here today, we're going to talk about not so extreme programming. And first, Gene, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second. Does this meetup have a code of conduct?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
The code of conduct is really basically, mutual respect, keep your mics off, cameras on, no profanity, no nonsense, etc. But I think you have a loaded question.
No, it's just whenever I speak for many years.
Oh, no. You would definitely will look out for anything that may not be appropriate, and we'll try to halt it. But we have a very good crowd. We had one or two exceptions in a decade that things went south. Yeah.
Okay, so I always ask. I don't have a right answer or a wrong answer. Just that for some people it's important to know. And the main thing, which we just did, is to remind ourselves how we want to behave here. And just like with the team agreement, just like with test-driven development, just like with so many things about Agile, when we say out loud together what we intend to do, it helps us do it. So there we did it. We did it. Good. Thank you. So who is this talk for? I promised in the abstract that it's for everybody, not just programmers. So if you're here and a programmer, cool. If you're here and not a programmer, really cool. Thanks for taking a risk on extreme programming. This is for anyone involved with Agile, even if it's been more like Agile for you. And it doesn't matter which role, and it doesn't matter what kind of scale. And here's my first provocation. I have two from Dragan Stepanovic. The first one, he said on Twitter, this one's from LinkedIn, pretty recently. Yeah, there's a link to it. He says, pushing straight to trunk plus test-driven development plus mob programming, don't worry if you haven't heard these things before, we'll get into them, is way less YOLO, YOLO being you only live once, so go nuts, go crazy, than working on an isolated long-lived feature branch, which people do a lot of, with a delayed review and integration feedback. People do a lot of that too, and a lack of tests. He's saying trunk-based development, test-driven development, and mob programming is less YOLO than what seems to be a corporate de facto standard. This is actually how my talk started. I saw this and I thought, huh, the name extreme programming is a really interesting name, and this is one of the reasons why. How does it frame what it is that we're doing when we're doing it? It frames it as extreme and it frames it as programming. So let's keep going. Compared to what? We're going to come back to this. This is a very important question. The XP has a definition. This question is not part of the definition, but it's a very XP question, not least because Kent Beck is seen to ask it many, many times as part of a decision-making rubric. And I did a little link to a YouTube clip where you can watch that later, an example of him asking it. Extreme programming, this is a name with some properties, and it sounds like I just said, like it's extreme, and it's for programmers. But I want to make a point here. What Kent Beck had in mind when he was co-defining it is in service of a mission. His mission was and is, you can find it on his website, to make the world safe for programmers. So if you're a programmer, you can imagine what that's about. If you're not a programmer, you might also be able to imagine what that's about. When work arrangements for developers are adversarial or misaligned or less than humane, it's often like that for programmers. And Kent's mission, and to some extent mine, is to change that. So some of what extreme programming says, if you look in the book, here's a book. It's a great book, recommended. If you get the first edition, also great. Second edition, also great. You could do a lot worse than either one. Some of what's in this book is about what programmers need to do. Everything that's in this book is about what non-programmers need from the programmers. So it's interesting that it's targeted at the programmers, because the things that we do when we're doing it benefit the people around us. And that's how we make it safe for ourselves, is making sure they get that benefit so that they don't have to make guesses how to get what they need from us. And so it still might be extreme if you're a programmer. I guess it depends how you're raised. Some of the things you have to do require courage. They require forthrightness. They require looking risk dead in the eye and deciding what to do about it. But if that's comfortable for you, it can be very comfortable. So what do we all need from teams? Number one, return. Number two, on. Number three, investment. That's it. We need ROI from our teams. They're big investments. When you organize a team, when you hire for a team, when you upskill a team, when they go through stages of development with each other, it's a huge investment, no matter how you slice it. And what we need from them, the reason that we do all the things we do, managing them, interacting with them, being part of them, is because we're worried we're not going to get that ROI, or we're not going to maximize it as best we could, or we're not going to get it at all. So starting from that premise, how do we get this kind of ROI? The biggest, this is like a means to the end and then a means to the means to the end. The means to the end, how do we get that from teams, is that we need our teams to give us good choices to make. How do they give us good choices to make? They need to be intentional about risk, knowing what it is, saying it out loud, choosing explicitly how to manage it, and ideally organizing the work to knock down the biggest risks first. That's one. Going closely with that is keeping control of costs, which is one of the biggest mistakes that's made in software development every day around the world. because the default thing that happens in a software development project or product development context is that if you do not employ specific daily code investment techniques, the marginal cost of the next change is going to be higher and higher and higher and higher. It's not going to be flat. The maintenance cost curve is going to go up and up and up the more you go. This happens nearly every place that software is being developed. And so to start with, in order to give decision makers good decisions to make, we have to stay on top of risk and we have to stay on top of cost. And that requires technical skills from the developers, but also room in the schedule to make that kind of investment as we go. And if we don't pay it now, we're going to pay more later. So this has to be baked in. Secondly, how do we give good choices to decision makers? We have to have accurate situational awareness. This is one of the things that makes agility, is that we know the position that we're in. It is not an over-leveraged position. Given how our code is put together, we could easily change direction. We could easily choose something else. It wouldn't be absurdly expensive if we decided we had to go in that direction. It doesn't mean we should change all the time, what our plan is, but it means that we should position ourselves so that those options are available. And so situational awareness here, what I mean by that is knowing at all times that our code does what we mean and can be deployed, or better yet, is deployed. So we don't have inventory. We don't have sort of a hypothesis inventory of things that are built up waiting to be validated. We don't have a code behavior inventory where we think it's supposed to work a certain way, but we haven't checked yet. We're keeping that inventory low so that what is in the mainline development branch does what we mean at all times and is being validated, ideally by customers at all times. That's situational awareness is what I mean here. And then this one is a little bit finicky. Everybody wants some kind of predictability. Very often we can't get the kind that we really want, and so we substitute whatever we can get. But what we really want, I think, again, is a sequence of good decisions to be able to make and some kind of cadence on which to expect them. So this relates to the previous in that if you are always green on the main branch and you are continuously deploying to customers, then you continuously have the feedback you need to know where you are, and you don't have to point at a plan. You can point at the specifics of the situation that we're actually in. I can't say that planning is not important. Planning is very important. We should do it pretty often, and we should be able to adjust it pretty easily. And then this is a big one. Software development on the inside for the programmers is always a little bit surprising because it's an ongoing sort of cognitive construction of a castle, except that building construction metaphors always fall down. But the development process itself for developers is always surprising. And we try to keep a handle on that with the things I've talked about previously: risk intentionality, cost control, situational awareness. And the idea here is, since the process is always a little surprising, we need to make sure that it's not a lot surprising, because we're going to get surprises from the market, from our customers, from the budget department, and we need to be able to roll with those. So we have to make sure we're not spending our entire surprise budget on code problems. So if you add all those together, I think what you get are good options to choose from. And when decision makers have good options to choose from, you get ROI. That's my contention. I should pause here. I've said a lot of stuff. I see a question in the chat from Johnny. It says XP is only for programmers, right? That's what I'm trying to get to the bottom of here. A lot of the things are for programmers to do, but it is not only for the benefit of programmers. To the contrary, it's for the benefit of everybody involved. Yeah. Yeah. So I was saying that question, compared to what, is not a defining part of XP. It's just really closely related. Here is what defines XP. There are these practices. I'm calling them behaviors because they're observable, but they're practices is what we call them too. And it's these bunch, according to Ron Jeffries, who was there. And you can follow up on that resource to learn more. When XP was practiced and named for the first time, Kent Beck was there, Ron Jeffries was there, and Ward Cunningham was there. So I'll refer to Kent, I'll refer to Ron, and I regret that I don't have any links to Ward in this talk, but also a fascinating character. Highly recommend learning more about him. If you've ever used a wiki, like Wikipedia, he's the reason why, for example. So these are the practices or behaviors, as I'm calling them in this moment, that XP teams are doing. And take a look at this for a second and think how outlandish this would have been in, say, 1999. Like, what does this even mean? We still have trouble knowing what this even means. And how about this? How can you have code belong to everyone? Doesn't that mean that nobody's responsible for it? And small releases, like I guess we don't have to necessarily burn CDs and mail them out anymore, but small releases are hard to do. How are we going to do small ones? It means we're going to have to do them more often. How are we going to do that? And actually, it's not just 1999, if you're looking through that frame. Some of these things are hard to imagine today. Like I have rarely seen a team with an on-site customer, whether they're doing XP or not, or trying to. Rarely, rarely, rarely. Sometimes we have a proxy for it. More often we have a product owner, a product manager who is doing their best to guess what might be valuable. The product owner job, by the way, is a very difficult job if you don't have an on-site customer. Yeah, some of these are kind of outlandish, and I think that's where the extreme originally came from. The extreme originally came from the idea that Kent and Ron and Ward were on this project at Chrysler, a car maker in the US. And they were trying to improve and rescue a project. And so, as I understand it, Kent was reflecting, maybe all of them were reflecting, but Kent wrote the book, on what were the things that they had done in their careers to this point that had worked really well. And given that this project needs to get turned around, how can we do those things extremely so that we get the maximum benefit of all of them? And that's where this came from. That's why it's called extreme. In the context of what they were thinking about, it was. And for people who haven't met it before, it may still be. Oh, got a question. Thank you. So about slide 7, on-site customer. The question is, how does that work for software with thousands of customers from different market segments with different needs? Do you choose representatives? That's a very difficult question to answer. Obviously, you can't have thousands of them. A short hand-wavy answer is that in general, the idea that there's one representative of one customer on site, that's already removing a lot of the useful variance from multiple different users and multiple different customers, multiple different use cases. You're picking one, and that removes information. So no matter how you slice it, if you can't have every customer and all their feedback, then you're missing something. But we also can't afford to have every customer and all their feedback. So we have to pick how much feedback we can handle and how we can have it filtered on the way to us. Hopefully not too much, hopefully not insufficiently. Yes, one strategy would be choosing representatives. Another would be things that you can do now that you maybe couldn't do as well in 1999, which is to get telemetry and metrics from how the application is being used. There's lots more to it than that, but basically you need to be able to find out what customers need as directly as possible in your scenario. Yeah. And the details of that are, of course, human and organizational and complicated. Yeah. Another question, what are the benefits of small releases? I love this one. I have very strong feelings about it, so I'm going to try not to get carried away. But the benefits of small releases are many. The biggest one is to do with the subtitle of this book. It is Embrace Change. And part of that is sort of an emotional reframe. It's where we place ourselves in relation to change. But part of it is specific things that we're going to do differently to make it more embraceable. And just in kind of a mathy sense, every day a programmer or a team is making dozens or hundreds of commits, you could call it, of individual small code changes to a code base. The longer you go with those not in production, the longer you have this kind of inventory that I'm talking about trying to minimize, that affects your situational awareness. The more changes you have built up that are not proven in production or disproven in production, the more risk you have. And so small releases are a solution to when something goes wrong, not if something goes wrong. When something goes wrong, how hard are we going to have to work to find it? For a very simple example, especially in the modern day, I'm going to come back to this later. The name of the book is Extreme. Oh, I think somebody else referring to a book. No, this one, Extreme Programming Explained. Embrace Change. Ken Beck. So it's a very simple example of small releases. In this day and age, this wasn't so much the case in 1999, but it is now. In this day and age, software applications that do anything interesting have to communicate with many external services and tie them together. And so one of the things that systems now have to pay a special kind of attention to is managing dependencies of this kind. And so, for example, whenever there's a new version of a software library for communicating with a particular service, it's better for a team trying to manage the risk, as XP teams do, to eagerly embrace that change and take the update and make sure that there's a safe way to validate it. Ideally, you have a contract with the programming interface to the library, and you have tests that can exercise that it's still met. And if it isn't met, that's also very interesting. Now you have the most time to make a good decision about what to do about it. But if it is met and it does seem like it is safe, you go to production. And here is one change. It isn't even your code, it's someone else's code. And if you go to production with just that one change, imagine that either your system operates the same as before, cool, or all of a sudden it's broken in some cases. Well, you don't have to think very hard. Why did it break? There was one change. It was something in that one change. And that one change wasn't even our code in this case. It must have been something with the library. So that's a degenerate case, but the principle is the same. The smaller the releases, the smaller the search space when something goes wrong. And there are always things going wrong. And so we want to bound the time we spend dealing with things going wrong. Let's see. I know there's more in the chat. Let me see if there's anything I need to address before we go forward. Yeah, in terms of infrastructure, yeah, just the more you do it, the more you'll know the parts that are painful. And that's something in the book too. If it hurts, do it more often, and then figure out how to make the pain smaller. I'll come back to continuous integration if that's okay.
Thank you. I appreciate the response.
Yeah, these are great questions. These are the right questions. And then more defining behaviors of XP, depending on which edition you're looking at. Informative workspace, we all know about making it visible. Energized work has to do with sustainable pace. We're not just able to keep doing what we're doing, but we feel invigorated doing what we're doing. And that level of engagement is critical to bringing our full problem-solving creative capacity and getting the best results. Stories, we all know. Weekly cycle and quarterly cycle, those are a little more specific, but just if you take them as proportions, that there isn't just one cycle. There isn't just every commit we push to production. There isn't just every iteration we look at how we're doing. There isn't just every year we look at how we're doing. We have multiple sort of concentric feedback loops. Slack means not the chat app. It might even mean the opposite of the chat app. It means there is room in the schedule and there's room in our minds for doing things other than what is written down on the plan. Because as human beings, we need downtime. And as creative problem solvers, we will notice things that come up and we don't want to defer all the time, every time, fixing any of them. Sometimes the right time to fix something that we notice is now. And if we never have that slack, then we're building up the opposite of situational awareness. We have problems that we don't know how far we are from being out of. So Slack is really foundational to this. One of my favorite uses of Slack, actually, when I'm in a team, is looking for, right now our system is working. Right now, maybe all the bugs are closed, maybe if we're so lucky. But what would be something that would knock our system off of its stable equilibrium? What would take us out of service? What would break an API? What would pull the rug out from under us on a contract we have with an external provider? Pick one risk and mitigate it in some way. That's one of my favorite ways to use Slack time. And if you're a business owner, you don't have to know that that's happening, but if you do know that's happening, you're probably pretty happy about it. So Slack is pretty important. We have smart people with good judgment, and we want to preserve the vigor of that judgment, and we want to apply the results of that judgment. Slack helps us do that. And another way to look at it is if planning is good, and we should do planning more often, Slack includes time for individuals to make even smaller plans. 10-minute build, again, this is a little bit archaic, but again, in this day and age, it's still not always met. The idea is that builds have to be fast because they are, in some cases, the bottleneck to how many hypotheses we can test per day. Justin Searles has a great talk where there's a few slides on how developers feel in terms of energy and fatigue at the end of a workday, and how many times they were able to run their tests or run their build. And there's a correlation. And there's also a correlation in the speed of the result. The faster you can find out something isn't right, the faster you can converge on something that is. Slow builds get in the way. And then incremental design is also known as evolutionary design. It means the same thing that the term of art refactoring means. It doesn't mean the same thing that people speaking loosely about refactoring mean, but refactoring as a term of art means this. It means we take something and we improve internally how it does what it does. Steve Jobs said design is how it works. That's true for the inside of code also. Design is how it works. And because that is where the programmers live, there's a lot of value in improving the design over time. Also, the alternative is either that we get it right the first time, so we can just rule that right out, or that we never take what we've learned that would help and put it in there. And then again, we are losing situational awareness. So this is costly to not do. Now I'm spent 2 slides here on the defining behaviors of XP, which are the practices, but it is also defined by values and principles. And these practices are sort of projections from the values and principles onto what we can do to make it so. But the values and principles are also definitional. And if you've heard Scrum's values, they're pretty similar. There's a lot of overlap. And we'll come to that overlap in a moment. The ideas underlying XP from 1999 and earlier are things like systems thinking, theory of constraints, psychology of computer programming, a few other Weinbergisms as well, like what quality is and how to get it. Lean thinking. If you look at the bibliography of the book, it is on a lot of subjects. I just picked a few, but it is very wide ranging. So highly recommend. Ideas that are next to XP or overlap with XP, Agile as a whole, for sure. If you think about how Agile got defined in the first place, there were a handful of guys, and they were all guys, unfortunately, who had what they were calling, I think at the time, lightweight methodologies. So there was XP being thought about. There was Crystal, was Alistair Coburn's family of methodologies. Scrum was already a thing, I'm pretty sure. Fast was not. These other things are not methodologies. But everyone had sort of a flavor of something that gets work shipped meaningfully to people and gives us feedback in particular, compared to what? Compared to the methodologies that were dominant in the day, which were very heavy, very upfront, very try to think of everything to begin with and then trickle it down. And those weren't working that well. They never have. In very limited situations do they work well. And so there were a bunch of people thinking about alternatives to that. And when they got together, they decided lightweight doesn't have all of the right connotations. Agile is less disagreeable. Let's call it that. So this is kind of an umbrella term. XP is one way to live Agile. Scrum is another. Scrum and XP overlap a lot too. I haven't gotten to use Crystal, though I do have the book. I think that's probably true for a lot of people. Fast is a relatively recent development. The idea is that instead of organizing teams and then keeping them that way, you organize and reorganize teams in a self-organizing way, following open space principles. And I happen to currently work at an employer where this is how teams are organizing themselves. It's pretty cool. If you think about problems of organizations, one of them is that when you choose how to organize teams, you are placing a kind of a long-term bet on the priorities of the company. And you're also making it difficult, relatively, to change your bet when the priorities of the company should change, when the market says so or when someone else says so. Organizations literally are very good, like the way that you organize, are really good at doing what they're organized to do, and they really resist changing. I know Gene has people here talking about org design, and anytime you pick a design, it's a lot harder to do incremental design in an organization than it is in code. So fast is an alternative where we are not fixing the structure in such a way. We're in fact practicing, could be 2 times a week is what we're doing at my current job, reorganizing around the work. It doesn't mean that you have to switch teams. If you want continuity, great. But you can pick yourself onto a team where you know a lot, so you can be useful. You can pick yourself onto a team where you want to learn a lot because it's not your thing yet. People figure it out. This uses the wisdom of your engineers. So fast is a fascinating one. I'm really interested in that. Domain-driven design says a lot about like what meaningful directions for your incremental design should be. Trunk-based development says a lot about how to minimize inventory of your development process. There's so many. I just picked a handful from the top of my head, but it would be a really, really, really long list. So, what is actually extreme? This is the nut of my talk. What is actually extreme is not extreme programming. What is actually extreme are these prevalent behaviors that we see all over the industry. We see software projects being managed like they're exactly equivalent to any other kind of project. Like there are no unique properties of software that we should care about in order to choose differently how to manage it. This is extreme. Choosing work to stream one task or story per person is extreme, even if they choose it themselves. And if they don't, it's more extreme when someone else chooses. if we try to get through to the end of something without having difficult conversations about risks, that's extreme. If we're not worried about what's going to happen to the cost curve, that's extreme. If we don't talk to customers, that's extreme. If we don't let developers be part of figuring out what customers need, that's extreme. If we think that developers are basically fungible and that the problem is that we haven't pushed them hard enough, that's extreme. And in general, if we are making big bets with our teams and our money without designing in how we're going to find out how that's going, that is extreme. And so here's another question from XP land, not part of the definition, but part of the ideas. How's that working out for you? For people who are working that way, how's it working out for you? It hurts. That's how it's working out. Because what they're doing is extreme. It's not connected to reality in the way that extreme programming is trying to be. So not so extreme. Here we are back with Dragan Stepanovic. This is a tweet from a couple of years ago. He says, exponentially increasing the risk of something going wrong as you add more functionality is pretty extreme programming compared to TDD, if you ask me. Here we are back again with compared to what? Compared to what? So he's using that construction here. He's saying compared to TDD. You don't have to have it be that way. It doesn't have to be exponentially increasing risk. It can be pretty flat or, lightly upward. I've seen it. So this is XP as it has been. Let's think about XP today. It was originally defined in 1999 with the first edition of the book, updated with the second. And here we are in 2024. I'm inventing something. It doesn't exist. There is no XP expanded. I'm just making it up right now. But what if XP were being defined today, what do I think it would say? I think it would have to say something about distributed teams because it's pretty opinionated about the importance of co-location. And the world has changed. So we need to, maybe the way to say it, I've heard Alistair Coburn talk about it this way, is that you have to put line items in your budget for distributed teams that you don't have to put in for co-located teams. That's a good way to think about it. There are explicit things we're going to have to notice and choose to do that have some costs when our teams are not sitting in the same place because we don't get that serendipity the same way. So the book would have to have an opinion, the definition of XP would have to have an opinion about how to make it work with distributed teams if it were being defined now. Likewise, if it were being defined now, it wouldn't talk about pair programming, I don't think. I think it would talk about mob programming, ensemble programming, the whole team working on one thing at the same time on one screen. That's more extreme, that's for sure. But in some senses, it's less, actually. And it's more directly connected to lean principles, which XP is in part derived from. I think we would talk about dynamic reteaming if XP was defined today, just like I was talking about with FAST. There was a time when developers would really need to agitate for stable teams and bring the work to stable teams because the alternative is really difficult depending on the work environment. Dynamic reteaming turns this on its head, and with the right working conditions, including the right code properties, this is a really powerful way to go. I think XP would have an opinion about it in this day and age. I mentioned dependencies earlier as an example to why small releases are valuable. That's not the only reason, but dependencies are also way more prevalent now than they were 25 years ago. Typical applications now have hundreds or thousands of them, depending on how you count. And it's not something that you can like get it to compile, get it to run, push it, and then try not to think about it ever again. It's going to bite you in the butt. My favorite definition of dependencies, if I have a book in me, it might be about this, is anything that is not your code that can break your code is a dependency. And there are many, many, many more of those things now than there were 25 years ago. So I think as a risk management methodology, which XP is, defining it today, it would have to say something about how do you specifically handle dependencies? What are the things that you have to do? to stay on top of those risks. Likewise with branching, I mentioned trunk-based development. It seems very widespread to do feature branches and pull requests and get code review. And again, whole team programming addresses this. And there are a lot of costs of branching. So yeah, I think it would say something about trunk-based development, and it would be in cahoots with whole team programming. One of the things from XP that I personally have not seen or heard much value from is this metaphor idea. I think domain-driven design has gotten the most of it, which is that I think you need more than one metaphor. My understanding of the original idea was that there's one particular metaphor that's a lens through which we can see the whole system that we're developing. And by having that metaphor for the whole system, it helps us think about the whole thing. I haven't seen that be so. But I do think either really descriptive language inside the code, or when it's applicable, apt metaphors within the code, which is where DDD, I think, has the right idea. So I think if we were defining XP today, maybe we would leave metaphor out. I don't think it's been as useful as the other parts. And Benji Weber wrote a post years ago. Yeah, Jason, right. They're all intertwined as it is. Benji Weber wrote a blog post years ago with some of these ideas and with others of these ideas. I don't know if I agree with all of them, but he really thought the same thoughts. What would modern extreme programming look like? So we're near the end, and then I'll come back to some more of these questions. If you want to try a little XP on your own, without having to get anybody else from your workplace involved, there are a couple of things you can try that I thought of. One is if you go to exorcism, not exorcism, but exorcism, like exercise.org, there are tracks for every imaginable programming language and sequences of exercises in which someone who usually seems like they've done a lot of TDD has already written a sequence of tests for you. This isn't what TDD is like. TDD is not that you write a sequence of tests and then you make them all pass. But if you just want to get a taste on your own of how somebody who knows TDD would slice up a problem in a sequence of tests in a particular way, following these exorcism exercises can give you a picture of the thought process. Like, why did they pick this one first? Why did they pick this one next? And then reflect on how else you could have written the test in a different order. And so in the process of making one more pass and one more pass and one more pass, you'll get some insight into, yes, that's right, Sean, that's the right site. The links are in the slides, so it'll all be there when you follow up afterward. So yeah, it's an easy way to get started and do something that is very TDD adjacent. And if you really study the tests, you'll have a pretty good intro to what it would be like to do it yourself. And then if you wanted to try whole team programming, mob programming, there are public sessions. One of them that I've found is for a role-playing game being developed about mob programming using mob programming. And those are, I think, every Thursday. There's a link to the calendar on this page. And that's just a public open source thing, so you can join and see what it's like. An important part of XP, especially when you realize how great it is and how many people don't know that yet, is to find other people who know what you know. And these are some examples of places to find it. There are some Slack groups where these values are broadly shared. LinkedIn group, there's a mailing list that used to be the place when XP was really happening. It's still there. People are still subscribed to it. And if you start a conversation there, you'll probably get a good one. Twitter used to be awesome for this, not so much anymore, but here are some hashtags. I picked a few meetups. I don't know where everybody is, but look for something closer to you. And also bear in mind, this day and age, as many of you know, doesn't exactly matter where you are. So here's a few. And then I picked some conferences, two that I've never been to, the Big Agile conference and the XP conference. But I know that people who care about this are there. And so if those are things you can afford to get to, you'll find some community there. Another thing is called Global Day of Code Retreat. And I think that's coming up in November this year, where around the world, in a bunch of different places and now online as well, everybody is just practicing programming in pairs or groups, just for the craft of it. It's kind of like evolutionary design practice is what it is. And so that's something to look for. And then here are a couple more conferences. A couple that are coming up very soon. If you happen to be near Michigan in the United States or could get there, I know the people involved in this one. It's one of my favorite conferences. If and when I go to a physical conference, that'll be the first one. XP is loved there. And Agile Manchester is coming up soon in the UK. And I know they're having some very XP aligned speakers. This is both in the next week or so. So if it's very short notice, but if you're near these places and can get to them, those are great ones. A little note about what Agile means to me. Gene mentioned this at the beginning. To me, Agile means no more and no less XP. This is how I learned it. I was very lucky in my software career that the first programming job I had was doing XP. I didn't understand how lucky I was, but I've seen attempts at Agile done a lot of different ways, and the only ones that have looked and felt right to me are XP ones. So I'm a little bigoted about this. That's where I'm coming from, and that's where this talk is coming from in my heart. But if you listen to this little podcast, it's really 180 seconds or less per episode. I don't think I mentioned XP once. I just talk about what has to be true in our minds and in our hearts for Agile to work. And the feedback that I got from this that I will treasure for all time is right here. Someone told me before Agile in 3 minutes, I could not get my team to have a conversation about important topics. Now I have to time box it. So if you have a team and you want to get them to have conversations, I can recommend this. And I picked a few episodes that are specifically XP related, about frequent releases, about what refactoring is and is not, about what continuous integration is and is not, and what mob programming is like and why you might want to do it. There's also the same essays in book form. That's available here. And now back to your regularly scheduled programming. Let's go for questions. Gene, you want to help me pick some of the questions?
Yeah, folks, it's an open forum, so just, open floor. You can ask a question, just unmute yourself, ask a question, please go back and mute. You can type, like the caster did it. There's a typed question, I think, or will you do another mock? So that's for you, Amitai.
Yes, I'll work my way back up from there. Yes, that's where we met. At the Agile Coach Camp, Germany. It would have been in 2018. I will not be there this year, regrettably. But if you're there, if you're lucky, there will be some other technically minded coaches there, and I would be happy to sort of brief them on how to do something like that. So keep in touch.
Thank you for that one. Folks, anyone else?
I have a question. We've been looking a lot into DORA capabilities. A lot of this sounds related. Do you find any usefulness in that? Do you see any overlap? Do you have any thoughts on how useful those are?
For sure. Hi, Matthias.
Hey.
Yeah, it can be, especially as a lever to pull to get XP behaviors to get more interest in supporting that kind of work. If you have leadership that already is aligned to DORA or wants to be, then this is how you can get them more of what they're looking for. It's very much aligned. That's my experience.
That's good to hear. Thank you. And yes, nice to see you again. Thanks. This was an interesting conversation.
Thank you. A new question from Petar. Hi, Petar. What's the best strategy to introduce and roll out XP values, techniques, and practices to a typical company practicing Scrum Fallish kind of methodology at the moment? I think it's really path dependent, if I get technical about it. It really depends on who's there and why they're stuck the way they are. And that is kind of an archaeological project to figure out. But you don't have to know all the answers before you start. You can try things and see where they do make some moves and where they don't make some moves, and then sort of dig a little bit in that direction, try to get under why something's not being taken up. I don't have one good way. If I did, I would give a talk about that.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, what Jason said. Yep. Let's try to work my way up to earlier questions. I know I missed some. Yeah, Walter mentions Lean Agile Scotland. I'm happy to hear that's still happening. That's also a great one. Never been to it. We had a question, how can you work on the main branch without code reviews and automated tests before integrating? Yes, if you don't have any code reviewing or automated tests before integrating, then that doesn't work. I didn't say explicitly, and I should say explicitly, a lot of the XP practices or behaviors rely on each other. So you can't do one of them if you don't do any of the other ones, for the most part. It's a little bit loose here and there, but they're very intertwined. And so G. Hill says, and I roll with this too, you need to turn all the knobs a little, and then turn all the knobs a little. You can't get them really good at one thing without doing the others. You have to just get a little better at everything, and then they start fitting together better, and they start reinforcing better, and then options like that, where you can work on the main branch, become possible because the code review is happening continuously in a whole team programming, or the automated tests are baked in because they've retrofitted some and now they test drive. Yes, please, Esther.
Ah, great. Thank you for clarifying that, because the first quote on your first slide seemed to indicate that automated testing is less important. That clarified
No,
now.
the opposite. The opposite. I should clarify. YOLO is like set fire to it. I'm going to try whatever I can try. And if it blows up, it blows up. And what Rangan was saying is this is less YOLO than what people seem to actually do.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Amitai, I think we're going to take one more question.
Okay.
Do a wrapping comment because I want to make sure people are off. You know, some senior executives have contacted me and asked that people get stuck on the lunch and learn and they don't go back to work. And just kidding, yeah. But no, in actuality, want to wrap up soon. Anyone else wants to? There's a long type Matthias. Well, take that one, Amitai. It's at your discretion. Or
Which one?
there's something just popped up in the interesting. Thank you. There's a question in Beck. It's best if.
That was a response to Wouter. Wouter, am I saying your name right? Talking about the DORA regs in Europe, so it may not be related to the talk.
Looks like a question about the EU regulation changes.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry about that. It probably confuses matters, but nowadays when people talk about DORA, there's new regulation in the EU that is completely coincidentally called DORA. Which is
that is so painful.
Oops.
And then it actually does mean that they need to get some of their development practices to a higher level, at least, than that they're used to. So I just figured I'd share it because it is very confusing.
Thank you. I had no idea. Thank you.
Me neither.
Thank you for the comment. Yes, folks, I think this is a good juncture for us to wrap the talk because we are at the hour. So before everyone jumps, I want to ensure that we're recording, so the recording should be available for you for your replay, and also you can share with your colleagues. And Amitai, of course, you're gonna send your PowerPoint deck or the PDF better off to me, and I'll make it available to the wider audience.
You got it.
Oh, and by the way, before it's shameless plug, so everything that Amitai shared about his channel, his public speaking and social networking, please make a note of it. I'll also explicitly show on the page that I shared with everyone in the channel. And another shameless plug, Craig Larman, the co-creator of Large Scale Scrum, is in New York City, New Jersey in July delivering a large-scale Scrum for executives at a very large investment bank. It starts with a J, and then the letter is P. So I'll leave it at that. Okay, so please pick it up in the media. Thank you very much. Have a great the rest of the day, work, and the weekend. Amitai,
Thank you all for coming, and great
my
question.
friend. It's been a great talk that you have given today. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.